10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6.
Hello, and welcome to Launchpad, Rocket Fuel's interview series with prominent members of the Rocket Pool community. In today's episode, we have Ken Smith, who, as you all know, is a rocket scientist in the Rocket Pool community. Ken also hosts the bi-weekly Twitter spaces and calls where he talks with partner projects, integrating projects, but also with members of the team about everything that's happening in Rocket Pool, kind of like what I do, but a little bit less frequently and with the team involved sometimes. So that's really cool, Ken. Of course, everyone knows who you are. You don't really need much of an introduction, but welcome. Like we've been meaning to do this for a long time. It's such a pleasure to have you here. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing great in whack. It's a pleasure being here. When you first launched the series, I thought, oh man, it's going to be great to get on Launchpad and just spend some time chatting with you a little bit and for it. But it's finally happening. It's amazing how quick and how busy we all got between when we first talked about it and today.
I think the first time we talked about it was a year ago, or like something close to that, at least like definitely over 6 months ago. So it's really great that you're here. So, you are, of course, a rocket scientist. You're a member of the ODAO. You are on the GMC. You've kind of got your finger in in all the different pies that are like rocket pool, right? Like, how would you say how big a part of your life do you think is rocket pool right now?
It's actually a pretty large part. I mean, I do work a full time day job, but my hobby, my friends, my intellectual curiosity, my entertainment, it's all in rocket pool, rocket fuel, Ethereum. It's kind of a hobby that's turned into a passion, I think.
Yeah, for to also turn into like a second full time job, pretty much for most of us, or if not
Yes,
our
exactly.
first full time job. So that's really cool. So Ken, let's find out a little bit about who you are as a person, right? So, why don't you tell us a little bit about like where your passions and interests in computers and computing and all that started? Like, take us right back to the beginning.
Yeah. So I'm probably a little bit older than most of the community. This year I actually just turned 50.
Happy birthday.
And to me, computers kind of goes way back. I mean, I'm in probably elementary school, I think it was. It's the 1980s at that time, and I think my first introduction to a computer was as part of, I think it was an elective after school, or maybe it was during school. I can't remember, but it was. I think it was an old Commodore, and these were it was like learning basic, right? Like a 10, print something, 20, do something, 30, go back to 10. And in order to save for it, and I remember the classroom we were in, must have had about maybe six of these computers, right? I'm sure it was probably state of the art for the day and so forth. And we had an elementary school, I think, that had them. That was pretty cool. But only one of those computers actually had a way to save your file. And it used an old cassette tape that you plugged in with a cassette player, and you can hit record and then save the file to the tape, and hopefully it worked correctly in there. But you didn't always get that computer to be able to save your code, and so it was fun. I very much enjoyed it, but it was kind of frustrating because anybody who knows me in Discord knows I'm an incredibly slow typer. Like I'm hunting and pecking all the time in there, and I think I still had the same problem back then. And so to spend hours writing a simple basic code, and then at the end of the day, when the computer got shut off, that was it. It didn't save anywhere for it. But and then later on, I think it was maybe middle school or so. This is probably around 86 or so. I got my first computer. My mom had gone to, I think it was Kmart. I was trying to recall this. I think it was Kmart, and it was this computer was called an Atari 800 XL, if I remember correctly. And it came with a few pieces of software. It was one that you actually had a cartridge for some stuff, and I think maybe it had a floppy drive. I couldn't remember this one here, but it had a printer. It wasn't dot matrix. It was what they called a letter quality printer. It was basically like an old typewriter head that would just stamp, with a little ink ribbon in there, and you could do some word processing. And but yeah, I think this one must have had a drive because we were able to save programs, and I remember quite fondly myself and my brother. We were, would write code on it and play. We didn't have many games, but like we loved the computer, we loved the word processor and that sort of stuff. And about the time that I think it's now, maybe I'm in high school, just kind of starting high school or whatever, we bought the first, what I would call, real computer, that first Atari. I mean, I guess it was a computer, but there wasn't much for it. It didn't have much. But my first real computer was this thing. It was an ad on TV, and it was called Head Start Computer, and it was like learn a computer. And I think they had some wrestler in a wrestling ring or whatever. But again, we bought it. My mom spent basically all her savings and money on it. We were pretty poor growing up, and anyhow, she got us this 286 Head Start computer, and that one was kind of like the first real opening for it. We didn't have the internet back then, at least not yet. This is like maybe 88 or something like that. I'm sure there was probably maybe the internet at some universities or ARPANET or something like that. But for us, it was dial-up modems, bulletin boards, right? And I lived in San Diego back then. I still live in San Diego here, but there was a magazine that would come out in the various computer stores, and it was just like a weekly magazine that was free. They would run ads about computers in there, but there was an article in there by somebody in the community that would always write. I think it was like Ask Dave or something like that. And it was all about like computers, and they would explain everything to you. So every week I would go read it to try to learn everything I could about computers. And you'd hop on the bulletin board, you'd go kind of download whatever software you could get and play with it. And it really kind of started, I think, my love and interest in computers. Now, interesting, when I went to school, I went to college. We were in our family here. We had kind of drop out of high school early, but I was pretty smart, so I ended up going to college a couple of years early. And in college, maybe I should have majored in computers or something. All of my friends, if I look back at it, all my friends and roommates and so forth, they were all either computer science engineers or computer engineering degree majors. But I thought I wanted to be a chemist. So, I was in chemistry and biochemistry and molecular biology, and did it. But computers were always kind of a fun passion for me. My brother, I think, got the passion. He actually majored in computers and, now works in the industry quite a bit. He too is actually a node operator with Rocket Full.
Oh, nice. It's in the family.
Yeah. It's part of the family, I guess. And,
nice.
But yeah, and I, it's interesting because I think my career was, ended up in chemistry. It got me into safety. I work for a major public university in California here, and have a career for the past 30 years or 30 more years in environmental health and safety. And one of the second loves I came into was a unique profession called health physics, and most people don't know what that is, but it's basically a fancy word of saying radiation safety. So I spent most of my professional career working in kind of radiation safety aspects. It's been very, very rewarding. It's very, very technical. I got to apply a lot of my knowledge in college. I mean, I can't say I do a lot of chemistry, but certainly a lot of physics, a lot of math comes up in there, which was not my stronger suits in college, but it's something I really loved working in and enjoyed it. But now, as I'm kind of nearing a career transition in there, I'll probably expect to retire out of this job at some point. And certainly my passion and love is to, for job 2.0 is to do something in blockchain technology.
Great. Well, we'll be talking about that at the end. That's such a great story, Ken. Thank you for sharing your arc from basically from elementary school all the way through to now. That was very enjoyable to hear that. Tell me about your job. What kind of things do you like about your job? What have been factors that have kept you in this job for 30 years? Because I don't think we hear that from people much anymore, that they've done the same job for 30 years. How's that been for you?
Yeah, it's been actually a really rewarding experience. I mean, one to work, I was in college, flat broke, needed a job. My first job was actually preparing research samples for electron microscopy. I'd picked up this skill at a community college I'd gone to, and there was a researcher there that needed samples prepped and everything, and it was it was a good job for me at the time because I could work it at my own hours. So I would go into the lab late at night, and it was kind of a Common Core lab. So you always had to sign up for instrument time or bench time, or they had different microtomes that you would use to slice the samples, or sputter coaters to prepare them. And during the days it was always busy, but at night no one else would work kind of the longer hours at night. So I could go in there, I could sign up for as many pieces of equipment and instrumentation as I needed. And so I kind of created a little assembly line, right, where I could get one machine going and working and then go over to the next one and do it. So I was able to actually get a lot of work done in a short period of time, and produce a lot of stuff, and kind of thought I was going to go the research route. And then the professor I was working for at the time ended up, she was a little bit older in age, and her husband, also a faculty member, had some medical challenges. And so kind of out of the blue, or very quickly, she decided it was time to retire and get out of the research business. So there I was needing a job, and I found a job in the department, which was most universities have a department that manages a lot of the research safety for the university, whether it be radiation safety or biological safety or various types of safety. So I started started working in that profession, and kind of fell in love with it. It's been very rewarding, I think, because it's like an applied science. You can apply your knowledge that you learned in there. I kind of realized that research was interesting, but I don't know, like, what you think it is going through school, and then what it really is in the laboratory, it could be completely different. And I found I liked a little bit more variety of activities. I liked the interaction of people. Sometimes maybe working late at the lab at night when there was nobody there was a little a little socially isolating and so forth. But it's been kind of a very good ride. It's been neat to kind of work in higher education. It's certainly a passion, and you're surrounded by a lot of smart people, and it's been good. And then as I said, I kind of discovered radiation safety, which is kind of a forgotten profession. I mean, it was very big maybe during the post-war, post-Manhattan Project, kind of the atomic era, the 50s. Everybody thought atoms for peace, and then it kind of died down as maybe nuclear technology was being supplanted by a lot of other forms of technology. It's making a little bit of a resurgence just because there's not that many people in the profession, and so you get a lot of opportunities to do a lot of interesting things in that area. And I always kind of saw myself, okay, when I retire, I'll probably just spend a lot of time consulting in that area, or doing aspects of it that are an interest to me. I have bookshelves galore of just every textbook on the subject, and really much enjoyed it. But it's amazing how kind of life takes you down different journeys. Now I'm thinking an entirely different post-retirement career than continuing on in health physics.
Nice. So how was your interest in computers during this time that, after you graduated from college and you got this job and like it became your passion, did computers still have a part in your life, or was it like an interest that kind of fell by the wayside?
Yeah, it was maybe like a hobby, right? I mean, certainly I remember when the internet came along, right? So I was working at a small department in the university then, and we didn't, when internet was first starting to come in, I was actually, young technician at the time. I was actually one of the guys that was, pulling the Ethernet wire through the walls to kind of wire it up. When we first ran our first server, I was like the little server administrator for the little NT box mail server, and, learned a lot there. In fact, I've got a very fond memory. This is, I was at the Santa Cruz campus, which is just right on the other side of Silicon Valley. And so there, you had a lot of spillover in that time, and kind of the early boom of the mid 1990s with the dot-coms all going. And I remember just hearing about the World Wide Web, right? And back then in college, it was kind of Gopher was the the platform you'd have to go to. And it was, I don't even know how to describe it. It was like a text menu-based thing, which would be like you'd log in, you see a menu, and maybe two would be, like library, and then you would wait for that menu to load, and then it would be like 3 for biology and 4. And you'd find all these resources on the internet, right? But there was not an easy way to navigate them. And I remember, it was kind of like a learn at lunch thing, and we ran down to the big lecture hall, and somebody from the central IT service was showing that the university has just joined the World Wide Web, and to kind of launch it, they went to Yahoo, which was the big, search engine back then. Or actually, I don't even know if it was really much of a search engine. It was more of like a Gopher web platform. And I remember we logged in and it said, welcome UC Santa Cruz and to the World Wide Web. And it was like the entire banner on the homepage of Yahoo back then. And, I thought, oh, this is kind of cool.
Yeah, that's cool. So, how did you first hear about crypto, and when did that part of your journey start?
Yeah. So flash forward, a number of years. I moved down to Santa Cruz, moved back to San Diego, kind of my hometown area, and have family, have kids, working a job, and for some reason I'm on this online forum that I just spend a little bit of time. Right, forums were kind of a thing. This is maybe around 2013 or so, and this forum was on personal finance. I think I was trying to figure out some budgeting stuff and a couple of things. But anyhow, there was always some interesting post on there that I think I would just spend my kind of time reading on, trying to learn a little bit. I never really took much in finance or anything like that. But so anyhow, somebody had posted this question back then, and it said something like, what are people doing in their spare time to earn some additional income, right? And so I started reading the things, kind of thinking, oh, maybe there's something I should be doing in here or something like that, kind of looking for something to keep me interested. And one of the people posted, oh, I'm using my computer to mine cryptocurrency. And I was like, well, what is cryptocurrency? I think that was the first time I'd heard of it. And and so it kind of started this kind of rabbit hole to kind of look down. So around here, this is too late to actually do Bitcoin mining on your computer. But I think after doing a little bit of research, and what the person was mining was this other coin, this kind of, maybe it was one of the first altcoins to come out. It was something called Litecoin. And the kind of mantra around there is they thought, oh, Bitcoin would be gold and Litecoin would be silver, and you could still hash it if you had your GPU that's there. And so I remember very fondly kind of watching some YouTube channels. YouTube was around by then, and there was this one that is still around today. He's got a big Bitcoin farm. Occasionally I see a couple of videos from posts, but it was by a guy by the name of Carter. He ran a channel called Bits Be Trippin', and he would just show you how to build. And and if people weren't around for the mining rigs at the time, these little home mining rigs were literally, you would grab a milk crate, or it's kind of what it looked like to me, but I guess they were really file folder crates that you would go to Home Depot and buy. And he would show how you could just build a really cheap computer just with a motherboard, memory, and you would just kind of literally hang or sit on top of it your GPU cards, right? And I don't even know if I owned one GPU for gaming. I was not much of a big gamer, and but anyhow, the ideal of putting something together, running it in your office or your home, and actually kind of seeing these little credits earned, right? These little Litecoin credits in there was pretty addicting, right? I loved building computers. To do something that was kind of Frankenstein like that, I thought was just the coolest thing, right? And to be honest, it became quite addicting, right? You do one, you build it, and then the way that you would do it is you would hang them on these little risers, and you would try to stick up to like 6 cards on your motherboard, right? And so anyhow, I had figured out, I didn't have much money, but I had figured out that there was this store near us called Fry's Electronics. And if you're from California, you probably remember these things. It was like the ultimate nerd computer geek store, right? And there happened to be one in kind of the next town over, real close to me. And I would love going over there on the weekend or whatever. My wife would hate it because I would spend like all day there and probably not really buy too much, but I would go around every aisle and have to check everything out, right? It was like I could spend a whole day in that store. But anyhow, I'd go in there and I'd go try to find like old motherboards that were returned. And I found one that could support this if I rewired. I actually had to kind of like do a little bit of surgery on it and rewire some of the little card slots to get them to work. And but anyhow, I found them real cheap, and I think it was an old like Celeron processor that it would use, right? But you go out and you try to find these video cards, and this is around maybe the first big video card mining boom, and you couldn't find these things anywhere. Like I was kind of a little late to it, like maybe when I got there was a few of them, but by the time I decided, like, I think I could make some money if I scale this thing, right? Like, it was like, well, one motherboard and 6 cards, but what about if I got like, I think I eventually went up to like 15 motherboards. So imagine my house, right? Okay, I mean, I don't know why my wife put up with me on this thing, but like, I started building these things over the course of the years. Like every time I get a little bit of money, I'd run to Fry's, try to find one of these cards, and I'd build one of these things and I'd plug it in. And I couldn't afford the really good power supplies, but I figured out how to like buy 2 cheaper power supplies and kind of hook them up together. Right. It was like constantly like battles trying to keep these things on. Right. I don't think they were very stable, but anyhow, I didn't quite understand like limitations of, certain, amps on a panel. Right. And I think there's still a plug in the kitchen that like literally has some burn marks that I don't really use that plug anymore, but one of these days I have to replace it. But I still keep the little burn marks here because I'm sure I was maxing out every circuit, every panel in the house with it and running extension cords when I realized like, you can't put them all in one room because the circuit breaker will blow, right? So then I had extension cords through the hallway into another room. And anyhow, I think I was addicted, right? I got to the end where you couldn't talk in most of the rooms because of the fan noise, right? During the winter, it was great. You never had to heat the house. You can't really heat it much in San Diego. But, during the summer, it was hot in the house. And I think eventually it was, it was either I need to go or the rigs need to go.
So did you make any money from this? Like, was it a passion project or was it like, actually, did you make any money from it?
So that is a good question. It's interesting, right? Because, around this time, right, it had the first, like, I think it was maybe right around then, they had the first like bull run. Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you look at it now, it's not even like a blip. It's like, what are you talking about? Ken, it looks flat. But I think it went up, the price went up a little bit. And I was fortunate in 2 senses. So the first sense is not really knowing what I was doing. I learned how to join a pool back then. And one of the pools, and I cannot remember the name of it. I'll have to go back and look maybe through my records or something, but it was a pool that, very luckily for me, you would mine Litecoin, but at the end of the day or the end of the pool cycle, maybe it was daily, maybe it was weekly, I can't remember. They would actually convert, they would sell your Litecoin and then they would pay you out in Bitcoin. So, that was good in a sense because Litecoin had these kind of great ups and downs and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I made some Litecoin that got sold into some Bitcoin. And I was fortunate enough that to me, it was, kind of a hobby, a little bit of an addictive hobby. And so I didn't really need to sell anything. It was just kind of like, that's what I was doing for fun. And so I was able to hold on to that through not only that cycle and the other cycles. And that proved to be very, very fortuitous.
Yeah.
But, in hindsight, I probably should have just taken what I spent on the computers and the rigs and just bought the cryptocurrency, right?
Yeah.
But then you wouldn't have learned. You wouldn't have like had a passion. You wouldn't have learned how some of this stuff works, right? I certainly learned a lot more about computers than I ever did doing that.
Nice. That's amazing. So how did you get into Ethereum then? Like what happened to transition from being like a Litecoin miner accumulating Bitcoin to hearing about Ethereum? Like when did you hear about Ethereum?
Yeah. So it's, the cycle had gone through and it's done and it was kind of like in a down cycle. And I was realizing that, what I was paying in electricity was, pretty high. I mean, I don't live in the cheapest electricity rate. These are probably not the most economical cards because I couldn't buy the really good cards. I was always buying kind of these like R9 270s and, and just trying to figure out what I could do to kind of, keep it going. And I realized, okay, the hash rate was just going through the roof at the time. And I think I had sat down with a spreadsheet and just figured out, okay, this is not going to work. I had one last little foray in it where, we're just starting to come out with ASIC miners for Litecoin. And there was already some in Bitcoin, but I kind of felt like Bitcoin, I was late to the game. I mean, I wish I could go back and tell myself, you're not late, you're very early. But I felt like I was late, right? I thought like, okay, so let me try to chase the next best thing. So I sold all my GPUs, right? I did it on eBay. I think it was over Christmas. I just put them all up there and couple of days over Christmas, we're boxing up everything and, just kind of selling it and, pennies on the dollar or whatever, just trying to get out of it. But I kept the ASIC miner for a while and, but I was always interested in Bitcoin or whatever. And back then there wasn't actually a lot of content, like now it's like you can find everything the day it happens, right? Like not only your show for Rocket Pool, but like, you can hear from, Cezanne, you can hear from the Bankless folks, you can be on Twitter or X and, you just have all this information right there. And for me back then, there wasn't too much, but there were some podcasts. And one of the podcasts I was listening to was one called Episode Bitcoin. And I was surprised they're actually still around. Looks like they've got some good content. When I was just trying to get some dates straight in my head for this thing. But anyhow, I remember the episode. I'm driving home. So, I'm working now out of the Bay Area, living out of San Diego, but working out of the Bay Area. I used to go up there. I used to fly up there early week and, live out of a reasonably priced motel for part of the week and, fly back home for it. And so I'd have some time coming back from the office, it'd be about maybe a 30-minute, 40-minute commute that time of day. And, so I'd put on my podcast thing and listen for it. And I was listening to Episode Bitcoin, and it was, I think, their first episode they did with this guy, Vitalik Buterin, right? And I remember this very, very well because, I'm listening to it. They're talking about his project. I think they already had the auction. I think maybe it was just launching around that time or it had launched. But anyhow, if you've ever listened to Vitalik, right, he's just so impressive and smart. And I remember this very, very well. I got to the motel parking lot and I'm sitting in there and, normally I would just shut it off and listen to the thing. But this one I was so enthralled with, right? I wanted to hear what the next thing this guy was going to say. And I just remember very vividly sitting in the car with kind of the engine running and the podcast still playing and let the whole episode play all the way through. I'm sure people are like, why is this guy just sitting in the car? But, but anyhow, after that, I thought, I got to go check this out. Right. And I couldn't, my ASIC miner there was like a Litecoin, algorithm only. It couldn't do Ethereum. And I think even then it had to be GPU mined only for a couple of reasons. And my GPUs were never at the time, good enough to mine it if I even had some around then. But, after that, I said, I need to go get some. And, the only way I could figure that out is to, go to an exchange and, swap out some of the Litecoin or Bitcoin that I had at the time and get Ethereum. And that's kind of my first introduction into Ethereum.
Those early days, the ratio was amazing. Looking back on it, so
yeah,
you got a couple of nice moves there, Ken. Like you got in Bitcoin fairly early, and then you swapped that for ETH fairly early. So good job, nice trades.
yeah. If I could go back, I would do it like 100x over, right? But you didn't know, and it was just sort of like, to me, it was kind of like a hobby. Like I wasn't going to spend more than like what other people would have spent on games or a concert or something like that, right? And so I was excited about, kind of the roadmap that he laid or the vision for he laid. And of course, it took quite a while for that to go. It wasn't until, maybe the next cycle. So, after this, I sold my ASIC, that thing wasn't too bad. I had that hooked up in one room and, its power consumption was much less and the fans were much, silenter. And I think for another year, I let that thing run. And then eventually I decided, hash rate's going up again. What do I do? And, I can still get a little bit for it. Beggar ASICs were coming on the market. And I kind of realized, well, this thing's going to depreciate as much as I'm earning anything on it. And, another down cycle had happened. Right. So, I remember very fondly, the first one you're thinking, I'm going to get a little rich doing this thing. And then it totally drops out. And I remember the second cycle where I was like, man, I'm glad I held. Look, I can, for me, it was going to be, hey, I can earn some money to, help pay my mortgage. Right. That was like the thing I was working towards. Right. And, and then I thought, maybe do I do it or do I not do it? And, didn't do it. And then the market crashed again. Right. And then, I think around this time you're kind of like, oh man, I could have like made a big dent in the mortgage payment. What did I do? I totally screwed that one up. Right.
Yeah.
For it. But, and then I think whenever CryptoKitties came, maybe it's 2017 now or whatever.
Yeah.
There was a huge bull run going on there. Right. And I thought, okay, let me go figure out this CryptoKitties thing. Right. It's like, finally there's a a DeFi use or something like that. It's this program use, it's kind of everything Vitalik was talking about. But, maybe I just didn't get it. Like, I'm kind of like, wait, why are people buying these cat pictures and like playing a game and, trying to breed the cats? And so anyhow, I don't know. I don't want to say I was turned off, but I was kind of like, I don't get it, right? Kind of like Larry David in the commercial. I don't think so, right? Like what's the point for it? But and then of course, then the market crashed after that.
Were you on any like crypto communities? I know you said that you listen to podcasts and stuff, but were you talking to people about crypto? Where were those conversations happening?
Yeah, and I think I kind of missed that. I mean, obviously they must have been happening, right? And I just don't think I really figured out how to do it. I mean, like I would lurk a lot on Reddit, right? You'd kind of Google stuff on there, but I don't think I was I mean, I certainly didn't post about it, right? And I didn't know any close friends or like in real life people. I mean, there's a few people I ran into, we talk a little bit, but like nobody that I could ask questions about, hey, what do you think about this? Or what's this? And that sort of stuff. So I do feel like I missed a lot that was going on, obviously, in the community in those days. Certainly now when I've read a lot of the books on Ethereum and the growth, and there was tremendous activities going on in there, and it was oblivious to me. I kind of missed on that. I think it was busy in real life, and to me, my experience had just been kind of the mining side of it, and I didn't really understand the whole security aspect of mining and what value you were doing. I just kind of saw it as a way to make a little money or whatever, or an excuse to buy computers and be able to say, well, it's part of the business, don't worry about it.
I like that. So, what happened with the bull market? I said after the bull market, 2018, we had a brutal bear for a couple of years into 2019, early 2020 with COVID, like everything kind of crashed. Like, what was that period like for you?
Yeah. So my job at the time, so now I work in our central university's office, and I actually had to play a pretty significant role in the early days in the COVID work, right? Because part of my profession, we were actually kind of watching some of the early onset of the virus in early January, right? So it was kind of it was a stressful time, and it was a challenging time because you were trying to convince senior leaders of the emergence of this virus, right? That was, something just theoretical in there. And I remember doing some work. I was working incredibly long hours at the time, doing some work on like, our university's, 150 years old, and actually looking up actually what happened in the archives of the university and the influenza pandemic of 1912, right? And and so it was finding some old stuff about what the university did and preparing plans, and you're pitching it to some very prestigious leaders, and they're kind of looking like you like, I think this guy's lost it or whatever, right? But then as everybody kind of knows, it started to play out. Some of the first cases were found here in California, and some of our hospitals that our university operates, and so it was kind of very intense for that period of time. And so whatever else was happening in the world around that time, I wasn't paying attention to it. I kind of had to live and breathe COVID almost full time. And it wasn't until I think maybe the summer of 2020, maybe 6 months into the pandemic, something like that. And anyhow, I think I just kind of needed a break, and I'm kind of just surfing the web trying to decompress a little bit. And I had seen Vitalik's name come up, and it was talking about the continued switch to proof of stake. And I kind of remember that was one of the visions that he was kind of laying out. And I thought, oh, really? They're about ready to do that. And anyhow, I started thinking, oh, this could be kind of like mining yet again, and see, this could be kind of fun. I'll actually be doing something. Maybe I'll figure it out a little bit more. And, by this time now, there's, tremendous resources for the community, right? This was DeFi summer of 2020 had just kind of ended or was still going. And I'm trying to just drink from a fire hose, trying to understand what all this stuff is people are talking about. And I think I was kind of in shock a little bit about how much the protocol had grown when I wasn't paying attention, right? And all these things that I, from CryptoKitties, where I was like, okay, I don't quite get it, wow, can you believe all of this is here? And like, I wasn't paying attention, like what was I doing? And so then it was, kind of that summer, it was about ready to launch. The people were signing up in the contract, and I decided, okay, I want to stake, right? And I was trying to decide how I was going to stake, right? Was I going to solo stake, or was I going to find, at that time I was thinking, oh, do I use Coinbase or Kraken or, I think I was also looking at all nodes. Do I just pay them to run the node and for it? But I kind of decided, no, I actually enjoyed hands-on hardware. I want to figure this out. Whatever it takes. It can't be harder than the mining aspect. Let me go learn it.
So then you started learning it, and then what happened?
Yeah. So then, I came across the eStaker community. I think that was like all roads were kind of taking me there. And either I was in the Discord. I don't know if I posted in the Discord yet, or somebody else asked the same question, and they were like, well, what would you do? And I think a lot of people had commented, well, either we would solo stake and sign up and do it. And they had the guides. They had like Coin Cashew, and I forget who the other person was.
Summary sat.
Yeah, Summary Sat's guide in there. And I actually went through them. I'd old school. I'd had to print out the guide and put in a 3-ring binder, and was kind of learning. My Linux skills were a little old, right? And I'm kind of going through it and trying it on the test nets and so forth. And somebody else had mentioned, oh, you should check out Rocket Pool. And so I went over to Rocket Pool, and my first impressions were, I actually looked it up here. I joined the Discord. Now it's January of 21, right? So the beacon chain had launched. I didn't feel like I knew enough to get in the pre-launch, right? But I did watch the launch and, kind of learn through that. And then, and so then joined the Rocket Pool Discord. And there were two things that kind of impressed me very much in there that I think kind of swayed my decision to choose Rocket Pool over solo staking. But I actually had this big pro and con list on a piece of paper that I was trying to sort it out. But the two things, if I recall correctly, that really influenced me is, one, even back then, the documentation was so much better, right? I kind of felt like, oh, okay, these other guides were good, but like, it's so much easier in Rocket Pool from that documentation, right? I kind of feel like I can follow this. And then second, the community was just really good. I think, I joined on the 23rd. I looked it up just in preparation of this interview. And 4 days later, my first post was asking a question like, hey, I'm either going to solo node or I'm going to join Rocket Pool. Help me. I've got some questions. Help me. And I think I was just really blown away. I think it was Joe that might have been with some of the first response to it, right? That was just like, oh, here's the pros and cons, and here's this and that and so forth. And, and so I just started ingesting the information, and I didn't really know how to do Discord. I think I was asking all the technical questions and trading and shit posting and general or whatever. I was kind of confused on the channels and everything. But anyhow, I think within maybe a week or whatever of in there, I had pretty much decided, okay, I know there's a whole bunch of people that can help me. They're in the same boat. And it's going to be Rocket Pool. And, they were still kind of working their way through the protocol and the contracts, but I was confident they were going to launch at some point. And it was like, okay, I'm joining that community, and we'll figure it out together here.
So you did figure it out together, because really quickly you were made into a rocket scientist, which is, a status that's given to community members who really help with like education or some kind of research, or really give back above and beyond, right? So how did you become a rocket scientist in those days?
Yeah. So I have to go back and look in there. I think, certainly there were others in there that I think had a much better comprehension of it. Remember correctly, it was Freeborn, right? Izzy from Lido. He was hanging out a lot in Rocket Pool, and Joe. And, Joe was kind of expressing interest. They were just, posting the jobs, I think, around that time period, somewhere in there. And Zero was there, Buddha was there. And, I understood enough of the concepts. I mean, maybe on the actual technical side in terms of the computer commands and codes in Linux, right? I mean, I would not consider myself a really strong Linux user. I'm getting better and better, obviously, over the years. But, I understood the grasp of how staking occurred and what was actually kind of happening, and explain it. And Rocket Pool at that time was under just tremendous growth. Like the Discord just kept growing and growing. And so there was constantly every day. I mean, maybe it's still the case even today, right? But like new people would come in all the time and ask these questions. And so, remember, this is still a pandemic. We're not doing anything else, right? And, the job is starting to, kind of have a little bit of a rhythm to it. It's no longer the crisis of COVID. It's more, managing under COVID. And, so I would just spend a lot of time in support, just helping everybody. And to me, it was a benefit both ways. I felt, I was giving back to the community that it kind of gave to me, but two, it was also, I'd come across something new. And I was like, I don't know. I haven't seen that error before. Let's try to work through this one together and see where it is. And I think they were, recognizing that there were a number of folks that were contributing that way. And so they created them. Back then it was called educators, I think. And the rocket scientist motif didn't really come along until I think Joe had suggested it and said, hey, we should keep a little theme going here and so forth. So I think I first joined, it was as an educator. And nice. And so that was kind of neat. I got to learn quite a bit there. And then I think it also helped out too. They were in testnet mode, and I can't remember which testnet this was. Right, there were a couple of them, but anyhow, I was trying to figure it out. I'm always kind of curious, and I didn't quite understand how the inflation worked in the RPL token. And so one of the things I was trying to help Dave with, Dave was much more directly active on the coding. Dave and Jake were kind of taking a lot of the lead in there. And so I said, hey, Dave, why don't you let me try to just track the inflation on this test net? I think it was every 3 days, and I'll create a little spreadsheet and we'll start tracking this thing. And so anyhow, I started doing that. And one of the things I noticed is when I was trying to recreate the inflation just manually in the spreadsheet, I could never get the numbers quite right. And so anyhow, that kind of pointed out a little flaw in the inflation code that I think I picked up, and then one of the auditors had picked up as well too. At least the auditor knew how to explain what was causing it. I just knew something wasn't adding up, but I couldn't quite figure it out. And I think that kind of helped a little bit too, when they were like, okay, Ken's, contributing, he's taking time to kind of understand this at a deeper level in there.
So, you came into the Rocket Pool Discord with some ETH. What convinced you to buy RPL to get ready for staking?
Yeah. So, once I decided that, okay, it was going to be Rocket Pool, right? That's what I was going to do. And then I was like, okay, what am I going to do with my ETH? And, there was still a lot of the DeFi going on, right? It was actually a great time to be in trading, I think, as we were in the betas. Everybody was in there. I remember there was like a DGen Discord server we were going in, and all these different protocols were kind of in their heyday. Some of them that didn't make a lot of sense and some that did. And I would go there to just kind of learn about it. I was still kind of like maybe CryptoKitties, like, I don't get it. Like, what is this pickle jar? What am I doing with the pickle jar? And why are all these DeFi things named after food? And, and it was, I was like, wait, this, is this there? And anyhow, I kind of just decided, what I'm going to do with my ETH is I'm going to stake it, because I could get the node validation. I understand what proof of work versus proof of stake is. And, and to me, it just made more sense. And I thought it was perhaps a little more conservative, right, than some of these longer shot things. And so, I just kind of done my math and said, okay, let's, I'm going to need this amount of RPL, and I'll figure out how to use one of these, exchanges. This is going to be kind of my first DeFi interaction, and do it. And so anyhow, in the thing, I think Joe was pointing out, there was this well, I think it was 0xCC or whatever, one of the first wells that was, had this buy that I think just routinely, or sell. It was every couple of days, it was just constantly. Yeah. And so the price was going down. And so this was kind of interesting for me to watch and, just kind of look at it and see what's there. And I think, everybody was saying, as soon as he sells that last little bit, that's when we all need to hop in here and kind of buy it. And to me, it was just more just an allocation of, hey, let's do it to kind of, get the correct number of nodes that I need, right? So I was trying to do the math and figure out how much RPL I needed just to run the nodes that I wanted to run for the validators.
Great. So then you became a rocket scientist. How was it in that summer? Like, ETH and Bitcoin crypto as a whole was in a huge bull run, working towards getting mainnet going. Can you tell us a little bit about what the Rocket Pool community was like at that time? Like, what was trading like? What was being in the thick of it? Like, how was that for you?
Yeah. It was definitely a bull run, right? I mean, there was every day, like I was looking forward to, to me in the evenings and the late after, after work, basically all the way through the middle of the night, was to get into trading. Not only I think for just the excitement, there was a lot of excitement, but always like every day something was happening, right? Like, and so somebody would go, "Hey, did you hear about this or what's that?" And I don't think I was quite on Twitter then, so that there was a lot of folks that would hear something on Twitter and then come over and share it, and so it was always an adventure each night. I mean, now I think I'm maybe bit off a little more than I could chew, so I don't have as much time kind of keeping up with trading and everything in there. But it was certainly a lot of fun, and I think a lot of the folks that I consider my friends, I met through trading, right? In there, right? We were all kind of learning and exploring, and we were certainly riding the Euphoria, all the way to probably the Terra Luna, and maybe the time before when the price started dropping, and and then kind of rode that all the way down. But certainly there was a lot of excitement. There was a lot of excitement built up towards launch.
Were you not tempted to sell at any point during that period?
No, I mean, besides like the tax obligations and so forth, right? It wasn't, because this has still just been my play money, if you will, right? Back from back then for it. So nothing yet. And I'll probably wait for the next cycle to go before doing something.
Nice. Okay, so let's get back to launch. Mainnet launch happened, of course. It was delayed first before we got the actual launch. How was the feeling in Discord when we'd had so many betas before that, and then mainnet got delayed? How was that?
That was a little bit of a sucker punch there. I remember like literally we had a call, and I got to kind of host part of that call with the team ahead of time, and it was basically mission is a go. We're green lights across the board. We're going to do it, and then then there was a little bit of radio silence for about half a day or something like that, and I didn't really think much of it. And then there was the post, I think it was by Dave, if I'm recalling correctly, and it was basically, hey, it's a serious bug has been found, and we're going to have to pause the launch of this thing. And at first I kind of thought, wait, is he joking? Like what's up in there for it? But then I think once it was kind of revealed, like, hey, this is what it is, and not only affected us, it affected Lido and so forth. And and I think it was very glad. I mean, it could have been obviously a very bad outcome for Rocket Pool if it had launched. I forget. It was an individual from another competing staking firm, and I can't remember which one it is here. But I do remember I kind of tracked down the protocol and went over there and actually said kind of thank you to it. In fact, no one in that protocol had realized what that person had done. I think it was one of the founders or programmers on there.
Yeah.
And but basically it posted just a nice say thank you for claiming the bounty and preventing this accident from happening here. And and then
Stakewise.
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was.
Yeah, I think it was from Stakewise. I think so, but maybe I'm mistaken about that. But yeah. So sorry, carry on.
Yeah. I want to say Sergey or somebody that was there. And so anyhow, it was and so then it was it was good to kind of hear that okay, there was a fix for it and they had a way for it, but it would take some time. And then so I think real quickly it was kind of back on track and building up for the launch. And launch day was a little interesting. I remember that there was a little bit of a euphoria to kind of be the first, right? And it was a little nerve-wracking because I thought, okay, I'm gonna do this, right? Why not? Let's try to be in the competition for first. And when it launched, you'll have to remind me of the dates, but like gas prices around then were like astronomical to compare to what we're paying now, right?
You know why it spiked on launch night, right? It's because there was the airdrop for the ENS airdrop happened at the same time. I think there was a claim,
exactly.
And it went through the roof. Yeah,
it was like NFTs airdrop, right, and everything's in there. And then I remember, they had done a live stream, right, and everybody's kind of watching it, and a couple people were like, "Oh, let's all try to be the first," and everybody wanted to know how to like front run it, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think I really knew enough to like really how to get ahead of it, but like some people were like, "Okay, we'll try a couple of things," right? And I think everybody kind of resided around, we'll just write a script that will just keep repeating and looping over again, trying to do it versus trying to figure out the Etherscan contracts and put something through. But everybody kept getting timed out, because in the smart node stack there was actually like a little safety valve that if the total price of gas was going to be greater than, I think, an ether or something, or maybe it was more than that, it wouldn't transact. It would just say, hey, you're probably doing something wrong. You don't want to spend that much on gas. And I think it was Colfax in the community that after some period of time, I remember Joe was a little nervous, as I think he was trying to figure out why it wasn't working right. And he was on camera, and I remember I thought, oh man, he's earning his pay today to be in front of camera trying to troubleshoot something like this. Is it an error in the code or what it is? And finally, I think once Colfaxes went through, and this is after, I want to say 20 minutes or something, so we could probably find that video up on YouTube, that finally it went through. And, I think Joe got a sigh of relief. And, I was able to get, I think, I forget how many when Rocket Pool launched, it launched these things we called stages. And I think in the first stage, there might've only been 10 or 20.
Yeah, 10.
10. Yeah, I was able to get one of the last in that one.
Nice.
Paid way too much in gas fees for it, right? If you were smarter, you would have just waited for the frenzy to settle down, and you would have been in the same boat.
Yeah, then by phase 2, went up to, I think, like 50 or 100 or something. And then I think it was phase 4 like 3 weeks later is when it all opened up for everyone. And that's when a lot of people joined. So then, of course, Rocket Pool starts. And one of the things that I remember about you, Ken, because I joined the community just before the failed mainnet launch. And then I was kind of like slowly like reading, but not really contributing anything. And I think it was around that time when I had made the decision that I wanted to start staking, and I was going to do with Rocket Pool. And that's kind of like when I started seeing your name around. But I started to get a real impression of who you were when we started like reading some of your research that you were doing, like putting out papers about different things. So how was that process? Like, what made you start doing research in Rocket Pool?
Yeah, I think it's maybe part of everyone's journey in it, right? I mean, at some point you consume stuff, and then there were a couple of things. I mean, like right before I did my research thing, one of the things, there were maybe two things. Like, I always enjoyed the hardware side, right? Maybe that's why I enjoyed the mining side or whatever. And there were two things I kind of worked on. I mean, one, Joe was big into the Raspberry Pi, and we had kind of a little bit of going competition where he would, he'd post at the end of the day, oh, I got it down to 5 watts or whatever like that. And I fell in love with the little Intel NUCs, right, that I was introduced to as part of the staking thing, and thought, oh, these are kind of fun little, single board computers that, that's an Intel product that I know Windows, I know Intel and the x86 architecture. So I'm like, okay, Joe, I'll give you a run for it. So there were kind of two things I did. One is, at that time I was like, I bet you I could find a way to put this in a fanless case and kind of like do something there. So I figured out how to do the the Akaska cases, which I had seen in like some article about audiophiles that don't like the sound of fans. And and to me, my node was sitting next to me, and I was like, you're right, I don't like the sound of fans too. And then then one of the kind of, I don't know, flaws or critiques of Rocket Pool was that you have your node as this hot wallet, right? And there's some risks there. And I was like, no, there's got to be a way to solve this with some hardware. And I had written up a guide to do something called the Aegis key, the smart key, a secure key by Aegis. And if you look at my GitHub, you'll see it. But basically, I'd figured out that the government uses these little USB drives that have a pin on it, a little keypad pin, and the same thing. If you enter your pin incorrect, it's like a little ledger device, but you can put the hot wallet on there. It doesn't completely, like if somebody hacks the live server, they could still gain access to the file. But if somebody stole your home node, and it unplugs, they don't get anything. They might as well steal your ledger, right? It's like useless to them. So I had written both of those, and I remember in the community, I think we were looking at this time, I think it was on maybe it was MEV or the Smoothing Pool. I forget which one I had done first here. And one of the interesting things I had thought is, like, in my kind of health physics background, I'd learned a little bit about this technique called Monte Carlo simulation, which was they use a lot in kind of radiation dose measurements, where you have all these factors that seem almost insurmountable, like what radiations, which direction the particles are going, what's the shielding, what's the probability of it. And they can use like a mathematical approach that says, well, you can just play this game of kind of Monte Carlo simulations where you just come up with a probability throughout this thing, and create a fictitious photon, and pick a direction, and pick a material, and see if it probabilistically interacts, and record the result, and do it again. And you do it a couple million times or whatever, and you get enough data, and turns out that simulated response actually kind of matches pretty well reality, right? You can simulate it with enough throws of the dice. And I thought, I bet you we could do that with some of the rocket pool stuff, right? I mean, it would transition pretty well. We could take some of the back history to figure out these probabilities, and then we can create just a little simple Python model. And I knew enough about Python to like really crudely code it. I am not a coder. I mean, most of my programming I just took in a science class, but I always learned that the way I kind of learn something is to actually have a need to do something, and then I'll figure out how to make it do what I want it to do. So I'm sure when one of the first people to look at it was Val, and I'm sure he probably rolled over and had to edit a lot of the code and clean it up. But anyhow, I got it to kind of work and produce some charts, and I confirmed some of it by just testing it on some other stuff, and said, hey, this is a pretty good model. Let me write this up, because I think it's going to be helpful to the community. I think it's going to be helpful to the team. And I didn't really kind of realize it until much later here that that's kind of how computer science and Ethereum works, right? You reach some point, you figure out like, oh, we could probably solve it by doing this. Let me write up this paper and share it with the community. And those were kind of my first two maybe contributions for it. I think they were very well received. And one of them I got to go present. It was on the smoothing pool to actually model that, right? I think my first one was on MEV risks that we did the modeling on, kind of MEV and so forth. And then the second one was on the smoothing pool, right? Joe had already kind of, collected the ideals, and, we were going down that route. And, the real question is, well, okay, so if you build it, does it make sense to be in the smoothing pool or not? Like, I mean, just because we can build it, should we build it, and does it actually make sense? And turns out both of those projects were, kind of built upon each other. And so it just made a lot of sense. And that was a fun one, because I got a small grant from NodeSet back in the day when they were just forming, to actually present that paper at DevCon in Bogota.
Yeah.
DevCon 5. And that was really neat to be able to not only share it back to the Rocket Pool community, but to share it with the rest of the Ethereum group. And the room was packed, and there were many protocols that were there that were interested. In fact, I just seen somewhere recently that they've got one of the first solo, if you're a solo node, there's a smoothing pool for them. I forget who put it together, but it was came out last week or so.
It's really exciting. So first of all, I think you're massively understating the impact of the work that you did, because those couple of papers like really laid the groundwork, of course, for the smoothing pool. That was already an idea, but it really gave it a lot of momentum. And the MEV post that you made was one of the foundational documents that let us get LEB8s, right? Like that. Yeah. So that was a huge revolution in like rocket pools, like trajectory. Like it was a huge step up. So you can't just like, yeah, just put some research together. Like it was monumental, Ken. Like that was a really big deal. So like, thank you for that. Like how did that go from putting that paper together to getting LEB8s? Like what were some of the conversations that were happening?
Yeah, so it was interesting, because I think two things. I mean, one, when Rocket Pool first kind of formed, its tokenomics, or its model, its white paper, was that there would be this one-for-one backing, right? A node operator would come with 1 ETH collateral for every 1 ETH that it was borrowing, and was there. And then I think maybe in hindsight it was obvious or whatever, but hey, the number of people that know how to operate a node, or are willing to learn how to operate a node, and then have the financial resources of that 16 ETH was very limited, right? And so in order for Rocket Pool to continue its growth, right, it needed to find a different model. And so there was a lot of conversation going on at the time about, okay, well, so what are these risks, right? And I was consuming more and more information about how Ethereum works, right, and trying to understand this. And with Discord, you could actually go down and track down some people that would post something, right, and you can ask them a question. Hey, on that post or that Medium article or that blog entry you put, like, what did you mean when you said this? And I thought that was absolutely fascinating in the community to be able to kind of ask these people, track them down and ask these people, and everybody was so willing to help. I mean, that's the culture of Ethereum, right? And so, we were focused a lot of the time about the protocol penalties, right? The slashings, the inactivity leaks, and that sort of stuff. And there was an article that came out by a group called Pintel. They got hired by Lido to do some work, and and they started to kind of show that, well, you can start to quantify these things, right? There's data and there's probabilities, right? And we know the conditions for each one of these things. And I had seen some of their work, and I was like, oh, this kind of reminds me of sort of what I do in my profession, which is these risk assessments, right? Like, there's something they actually call in the industry called a micro-mort, like what's your probability of dying in these high risk safety events, right? And I'm like, what, I could probably use something like that. And we thought, okay, it's going to be these protocol conditions that are going to be the big risk. And it turns out that when you actually kind of figure out the probabilities and then the impact to them, short of a very a large inactivity leak in which multiple clients go down, right? It's none of these impacts are all that devastational to Rocket Pool because it's so diversified. Even if you have a penalty offline, there's not going to be a corollary event, right? And so the cost of the protocol is just at most a couple ETH, right? It's like really nothing. And so it sort of seemed like, okay, this is not our problem, right? But I was like, so what is our problem? And one of the things I think some in the community were kind of thinking it would be this way, and but anyhow, once we started looking, we had time. This was the post change and in kind of MEV bots and MEV boost, and we had data. It was basically, hey, there's these things called lottery blocks, right? And that even though they're rare, you can actually come up with a valid strategy to steal these lottery blocks, right? And if you do, even though they're very rare, they're so rich, they're so valuable that if you steal them, you actually take a significant amount of returns away from the protocol, right? So I think that really helped kind of shape the community about, okay, it's this risk of lottery block theft, right? That's what we need to worry about. It's either, there's two strategies. You can either wait till you win the lottery and then steal it, or you play what I call the long con in my paper, which is you create this thing at a lower cost collateral node, and immediately you start stealing this lottery block. You steal all MEV, right? And that way you're earning even before the lottery comes, and you just hold on to your node long enough. And so, but anyhow, we were able to kind of quantify it and put kind of a risk value on there, which showed that you could go to 8. And I think even my paper, and then Val had done some work afterwards that is, just as good, and came at it from some different approaches and kind of reached the same consensus. It becomes kind of a level of risk appetite, like, well, how much are you willing to risk? And I think mine showed about 4 ETH. I think Val showed about 4 ETH, somewhere in there. The gray starts to turn to black and kind of risk. And Stater had come along, and I actually don't think they did some original work in there, right? I mean, they claim that they had given it to another company to do, and they might have contributed something, but I'm not impressed with what they put out. But anyhow, they concluded 4 ETH either as the same. And so somewhere around that level right now is kind of the area where if the node operator collateral is less than that, there's a higher chance that having one of these stealing strategies is going to be profitable in a reasonable period of time. So that's probably the limit right now, unless we can find some way around it. And that's what's kind of been keeping my interest, in the recent days here.
Okay, so that's a really great transition to something that the protocol is working on called megapools. So this got teased a few months ago with the upcoming upgrades to Rocket Pool, which are Houston and Saturn. At the time, it was just Saturn, but then Houston got kind of added as well, and it kind of got broken into two upgrades. Can you tell us a little bit about what megapools are and what thinking that you're putting into the whole megapool space right now, and how you're contributing to that?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things will really help Rocket Pool's growth potential, or actually any distributed staking pool that uses a node operator collateral, right, as kind of their permissionless pathway, right? Okay. And so, they'll like, from companies that don't require a node operator deposit, right, that just use, let's say, a permission set of node operators, they basically have, unlimited growth potential, right? The node operator doesn't have to put any collateral down. They can grow as fast as their deposits grow. But the problem they run with is, well, so what happens if that node operator starts to act maliciously, right? Like what are you going to do? And in Rocket Pool's, kind of forward looking here, I think there's maybe three things that kind of help. One thing's coming real quick, because first is, there's maybe a fault in the existing Ethereum design here, which is that it's got these two layers, right? The execution layer and the beacon layer, right? And the execution layer doesn't really know what's going on in the beacon layer. And in the next upgrade here, it's going to have a addition to it that will, allow the beacon route to be known in the execution layer. And so all of a sudden now it allows you to be able to program in a smart contract something that is triggered based upon the beacon state, right? Okay, so this allows you to detect certain things about what the node is doing. Okay, now the next problem you have is that of kind of MEV theft, right? And in MEV theft, right, you need this deposit of the node operator. Okay, and the fundamental conditions probably don't change, right? Meaning that you probably still need, if you're just a single node operator, you probably need about 8 ETH to balance your risk. But what happens when you start to scale that node, right? Instead of just having one validator, what about if it has 2 validators or 5 validators or 10 validators, right? In the case of a megapool, right, where they're all kind of grouped together, it could be possible to penalize the entire node deposit for all of those nodes, right? So that way, if they start to steal, you have a larger amount of node operator deposit to kind of counteract or to economically ensure that the node operator, doesn't act maliciously, right? It becomes even more powerful once you combine it with something called a forced exit, right? So like right now, the way Rocket Pool works is only the node operator has the signing keys to that node. Only the node operator can say, I quit, or I want to exit out of here, right? Now, if it commits a slashing event, then the protocol will slash it, right? But Rocket Pool doesn't have a way to eject that person if they detect that they're doing something malicious. But it could be possible in a couple of ways. I spent some time kind of thinking about, well, I mean, the easiest thing to do probably would be like you could just, sign an exit message, right? But you run into problems with that because these exit messages, at least right now, they expire after so many upgrades, right? Then you run into some problems about, well, then you've got somebody else that you now have to trust that has your exit message. And so is there a way to split it up? And it turns out there's ways you could do Shamir secret sharing, and you can split it up, and but then you would have to prove that everybody's share actually, when combined back together, is a validator. And so I spent a lot of time with kind of thinking through that, and shared with Popus in the community, who knows a lot about this, about different techniques we could use to do that. But I'm actually thinking there's a couple of EIPs coming forward that actually might give, instead of the signing key, the ability to exit a node, to actually give the withdraw credential the ability to exit the node. And if those come through, well, remember our withdraw credentials in Rocket Pool is a smart contract, right? And so now I think, as well as a lot of other people in the community, that you could have something like this, where there's a megapool. You get one smart contract that is your megapool. you can deposit the node operator Ethereum in there. And the more node operator Ethereum that you put in there, the lower your bonding requirement could be in terms of Ethereum. So maybe if you only deposit 8 ETH, maybe you just get 1 mini pool. But if you deposit 16, maybe you get like 3 mini pools. And if you deposit 160 ETH in there, maybe you get something like, 150 mini pools, right? Some way where it doesn't scale linearly, but it scales on some formula. And I spent some time kind of producing a couple of formulas in there that are trying to balance the risk model with the deposit in there. And then, of course, if they try to steal, if they wait for one lottery block, well, that deposit is such enough that it's likely to cover a substantial amount of that. They get, slashed or penalized for that amount of ETH, and all their mini pools are force exited by the protocol. And it would be great if it could do it in a permissionless standpoint where it's on protocol, right? It doesn't require the use of an Oracle DAO to do that.
Wonderful. I'm really excited to read your research on that, Ken, because I think just like before, it'll be one of the guiding lights, for how Rocket Pool will actually go about implementing megapools. And that's going to be extremely exciting because it's going to shift the dynamics of Rocket Pool's growth completely from what they've been like since launch up to now. There'll be like a before megapools and after megapools era for Rocket Pool, and that's how we're going to get to 20% of the stake, right? It's going to be really amazing. So I'm really excited to see what you come up with. Can you give us any like breadcrumbs about when some of your work might be featured in writing that we can all enjoy?
Yeah, I don't know. It turns out it's complicated, right? But I was hoping I actually did put in to give maybe a small talk about possibilities for Dev Connect that's coming up as part of the e-staker thing. So I'll try to produce something there, and I'm hopeful it kind of quiets down a little bit around the winter break around here. So I'm kind of hoping to produce something there. But I think it's going to be a thing that will probably just outline kind of these possibilities. And I don't think I'm not the only one to kind of think of these things. I think there's many in the community that have started to explore this and try to look at it. And certainly I think, you can tell from the teams, RPIP proposals are putting out about what's in Houston and what's in Saturn, and that this is clearly the direction that they're thinking, right? That not only megapools offer you the efficiency of just having a single contract to pull from, and it would aggregate all your execution layer rewards, right, and your consensus layer rewards that go into that mega pool, right? So you're gonna save on gas and transaction costs, right? You don't need this rocket sweep to to go out and clear out all your accounts. But it also would allow them to aggregate your node deposit into this common deposit that allows you, I don't want to quite say leverage on staking, but it's kind of that you're putting down a larger deposit that could be totally at risk for any malicious act on any of your validators. But once you start depositing and force in there, it allows you this kind of exponential curve. Now there is going to be some upper limit, right? We saw it, we mentioned the hack in the beginning when Rocket Pool was first launching, right? I think we're always going to have that 1 ETH minimum deposit to lock in your validator, your execution layer, your withdraw key, right? And there's probably some de minimis amount. There's going to be challenges, I think, with the amount of RPL stake. I know others in the community have always kind of talked about this, like, well, okay, how much? Okay, so if we can get the ETH down to these lower levels, these ultra low ETH ETH bonded mini pools, what's going to happen to the RPL? And I think that's that's kind of a discussion that could be framed a little bit in some risk modeling, but I think is also up to the community and a tokenomic model about how much is there. I know others have really started to look at maybe this 10% value, but even that 10% value, you've got to kind of look at, because imagine if you got to 1 ETH, 1 ETH mini pool and you're pulling 31 ETH, are we really going to acquire 3.1 ETH of RPL? I mean, that seems very excessive. It would probably be a distraction to have people join the protocol. But if you also run it out too, I know we're node operator limited, but as you said, if you run these numbers and you just take the amount of ETH that's deposited in pools, this could give us plenty of growth potential. I mean, it'd be an interesting number to run. Just take the amount of node operator ETH and one of these nonlinear bonding curves, and we actually might have enough to get us to 22% already, right?
Exactly.
We may not need any more node operators, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what's so amazing. That's one of the things that I was thinking when we moved from 16 to 8, is that that 3 times our ETH lift capacity. Then moving from 8 to 4 would be 7 times. Moving it to 2 would be 15 times. Moving it to 1 would be 31 times the capacity of our ETH. At that point we had when we were moving from 16 to 8, we had 170,000 ETH. You multiply that by 31, you've got 6 million ETH potentially just from existing node operators, right? Like, that is an astronomical amount, and that would put you up at Lido's numbers, and that is without adding any new node operators and just basically changing the RPL bond depending on what that might or might not become. But it wouldn't be 100% transition to those numbers, but there'd be a lot to get us quite far without adding any new node operators. So there's some really exciting things. That's why I was saying earlier that there'll be, when we look back on this, there'll be a time where we think of Rocket Pool as before megapools and after megapools. I think that's how much of a fundamental change is going to be going forward. So it's really exciting to see that. And it's a shame that it might take up to a year for it to get here, but I know that other things have to happen before we can get megapools, like you were saying earlier, and those sadly depend on Ethereum core devs and developers outside of our control working on those. So we'll have to wait and see how it all goes.
Yeah. But no, it's interesting. I mean, I think you're absolutely right in that, before megapools and after megapools.
Mm-hmm.
I think it will be defining. And if you look at it, the run up we had towards Atlas and that, I think we're going to have a very similar run up and excitement and potential on there. And then I think that some design like that would certainly make Rocket Pool as competitive, as economically efficient as any other staking service that I could think of.
Yeah, centralized or decentralized, exactly.
Yeah,
it's really great to see that, and I can't wait to see how it's all going to work out. So Ken, another thing that you work on and that you just have finished 1 year of working on this is the GMC. So that's the Grants Management Committee, which is part of the Rocket Pool's community DAO, the PDAO, where we get a chunk of inflation and we pay that out to protocols, people working. You got elected to the first round of the GMC, and you're also in the running for the second round of the GMC, another year stint. What made you want to join the GMC, and how has that experience been for you?
Yeah, it's I would say it's rewarding, and it's also probably the most challenging function I've done for Rocket Pool, right? I mean, the joke is governance is hard, and and I think this was there, right? I mean, I originally thought, okay, like I spend time in my I call it fiat mining job, doing administration, and thought, okay, it should be pretty easy to set up a grants committee and we'll create a process for it. But it actually turns out when you kind of start with zero and you're working across multiple time zones, you're under some pressure to make these grant cycles. That it actually turns out it's pretty hard to kind of create a business process on the fly and work all the kinks out for it. And so I think it's been one, certainly I feel proud of my contributions, as well as all the GMC members. I know, Wack, you've been working quite a lot of time on there, right? And so it was kind of a lot of like step and fix, and and move forward and then go back and fix whatever broke on there. But I feel much better about where we've ended at the end of our tenure here, where there is now, I think, an established process that is hopefully much faster, right? We've got these rolling reward windows that people can apply. There's much more communication and interactiveness. So maybe a grant comes in and it looks good, but it's not quite tilted, or it's not at the quite level. There's a way to provide feedback to the applicant to kind of retool it and tilt it a little bit. I think we're starting to see a little bit more process about how to value these things, right? Things are looking pretty good. I still think there's going to be a lot of work in the year ahead for a couple of reasons. One, I think that now that we've got some processes in place, it's actually trying to execute on them and keep up the whole cycle, making certain we're paying the awards and the previous awardees. We're tracking their progress in terms of just project management. Are they making their endpoints on time and delivering on schedule? And then it's the interest is growing now, where I think the demand of grants is probably approaching to be greater than the amount of income coming in, right? And trying to still balance a treasury and a reserve in the GMC. But I'm very glad to see that there was a really new interested slate of people that want to serve on the GMC. So I think it's very rewarding. But I will say that it is a time commitment. And just a big shout out to Shefren, who's the administrator for it, that just keeps track of so many things. There's so many moving balls that I think I would be totally lost in terms of what I need to do next as a member or a participant on one of the subcommittees in order to make those deadlines.
Great. And what would you say to people who are, I know that the elections are already ongoing now, but if you could give one piece of advice to people who, might be first-time members of the GMC, what would you say to them as they're joining?
I would say first, welcome. Their contributions are very much needed and welcome on there. I would say it's not a perfect solution, so we are looking for continuous improvement on the thing. And I also think it's going to be very rewarding. So plan to do some hard work, roll up your sleeves, but you're going to learn a lot about Rocket Pool. You're going to learn about the community. You'll be forced to interact with some folks and try to figure out how some of these innovative grants might benefit Rocket Pool and how they may not. So it's going to be intellectually challenging, but it is work. So thank you for your service in advance.
Were there any grants that you worked with approving that you were either like really happy the way that it worked out, or you're really excited to see what's going to come out of those grants? Like, do any of them stick out to you?
Yeah, it's certainly some of the retroactive ones I thought were really good to kind of award and value, right? And trying to get the correct amount of remuneration on there, I think was always challenging, right? Sometimes maybe we were a little more fiscally conservative, not quite knowing where it is. I think I'm very interested in a lot that are coming forward just by so many, not only so many people in the community that are contributing, but just people outside of the community that have a service or product or have some solution that we didn't even know about, that are coming forward and saying, look what we can partner with or do with Rocket Pool. So I do think it's very positive looking forward, but it's also kind of neat to just see some of the content that was created, obviously, as you know, from many of the folks within the community that got rewarded. So I think was most excited about some of those retro payments.
Yeah, wonderful. So Ken, a little while ago you said that you haven't really sold any of your crypto, and you've going through like your 3 cycles, basically the first one, and then in 2017, and then again in 2021, and that you might sell going to the next cycle. What are your plans for like the next part of your life now? You said that you might be transitioning out of your fiat mining job. What's next for Ken?
Yeah. Well, certainly Ethereum has become more than a passion, right? I think it's a hobby that I think I very much would like to form into a second career, right? At some point, I think it makes sense to retire out of my existing job. And I very much, would, I think, really enjoy a second career in blockchain technology. And, so I formed a company. I've always been a little bit of an entrepreneur, but I formed a company called Next Block Solutions. And it's still kind of searching, I think, in terms of what it's doing, right? I toyed with the ideal of doing like Ethereum research or helping other protocols do some of this, risk analysis or reporting on there. I toyed a little bit with building some hardware and, making that as nodes as maybe like a cheaper alternative to DApp node or some of the other providers that are out there. But to be honest, the thing I think it will probably end up being, and the thing I can see being needed, is that I do firmly believe that more and more just Web 2.0 companies, tech companies, just even commercial companies will start to use blockchain almost like they use a database, right? It will just become second nature. If they take credit card processing, they'll at some point take cryptocurrency transactions. If they do something in finance or asset tracking or supply chain tracking or something like that, they're going to find a business case for this special database known as a blockchain, right? And I believe Ethereum is uniquely positioned to be that, right, with its layer twos and the growth potential, the amount of building that's on there. But if you're just coming into the industry, it's a crazy industry to explain, right? It kind of reminds me of like literally the internet of the 1990s, right? Like, no, it's a computer, but you can go do this and you can shop online. And I mean, all these things that were so foreign at the time, right? I was kind of the guy in the neighborhood running around to the neighbors and friends trying to explain this and fix their computer each evening, right, as they broke it, right? Now we take it for granted, right? I mean, kids these days, they just grow up in this thing and it seems no different to them, right? But I really think that probably what I'll end up doing is providing some educational or training services for companies, whether it be the sales team or the business team or somebody that needs an introduction into this space, but they want the format kind of presented to them in a learning environment. Like let's go to a 1 week deep dive course to get us through the basics of blockchain technology.
That's great. So Ken, what are you looking forward to with Rocket Pool, with crypto? What do you think things will look like in a year, 2 years, 5 years time? Do you have any ideas?
I certainly think that it's going to be much more adoption, right? I think that right now, if you look at, most people's experience on crypto is maybe they bought it in their app, right? They bought it on Venmo or maybe in their, PayPal. I think it allows you to buy it, right? But they buy it and they hold it. To them, it's like no different than a stock or something like that. They're not really using it for its intended purpose. And I do hope we're going to start to see some use cases for it, right? So many times I've thought about just real world business cases that blockchain can fix, and you get kind of frustrated that the technology exists out there. Why aren't we seeing that? So I really hope that the decade ahead it becomes more mainstream. It actually gets use cases that are used in business. Maybe they don't even know they're using a blockchain or some protocol on it. I really do think that's probably going to be the continued growth of it. It's like, if it follows the trajectory of the internet, right? It's like, most people don't just use the internet because it's the internet. It's they're using it because it does something, and that's what we need to get it to.
Wonderful. Ken, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we missed in our conversation today, or do you think we got everything covered that you wanted to talk about?
I think we covered it quite a bit. I mean, I will say that the one I think just wonderful benefit of Rocket Pool is just the community of folks that comprise it, right? I mean, certainly my highlights is not only hanging out in the Discord, but I get the occasion to go to a couple of conferences, right? A few times I've been able to represent the team as being a rocket scientist and speak on the protocol. Other times I've just attended as a participant in there, but I think it's just it's a wonderful community to be in Ethereum, and it's even another wonderful community to be in Rocket Pool. So if you have a chance to run into me at one of the conferences or in-person events, please introduce yourself. I'd love to meet you. I've learned so much from my other friends and colleagues in the Rocket Pool community. I'd love to learn something from anyone else.
Wonderful, Ken. Thank you so much for joining us on Rocket Fuel's Launchpad. And it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. And I can't wait to see you at ETH Denver in 2024. It's going to be wonderful. Yeah. Thanks, Ken.
Same here, Wack.
Bye.